We're here to solve this statue park puzzle by Murat Can Tonta. It has an even rows and columns variation, which was our theme throughout the week, but even has a pretty elegant theme on top of that, which are even numbers. 2, 4, 6, 8 are the clusters of clues in the corners and pretty open middle section. All of these corners have some pretty fast starts to them. Some have different complexities in how they'll play out. We'll start maybe in this lower left where we have some unused cells that I've now shaded in green by right-clicking. And in doing that, we'll see that we have some shapes that are going to start to extend. We have a pentomino here. It's going to be a Y or an L. We've got one coming out of this corner. In the lower right, we have a pentomino. It's going to be a U or a V. And once we actually place one of those two shapes elsewhere, we'll know for sure which. In the upper right, we have this cell that's got to extend out, and in doing that, this topmost black cell has to come around the corner, and it's going to keep coming down. Actually, now it's completed a shape, which is a U, and completing the U, we place a V down here, and so we'll mark these off in our inventory as best we can. With those marked, we've got some more cells that are coming through, and this is where we're going to have to come to this upper left and see that this cell here always has to connect to these two here. If it came out and took these two, you can get as large as 3, but whichever cell it takes next is going to take another. Actually, notice that if it avoids this cell, it's always as large as 6 in the grid, and so it must take this cell, connect to become 4 large, has to avoid the cell to not be too big, has to avoid this cell to not be too big, because that would join to other black circles and adjacent cells to those cells. So we've got 4 in a corner, and we can't take the cell that's 2 in or 1 in because that would isolate this cell. We've got to take the topmost one and we place in the Z for sure in our inventory. Let's look at some of these top rows. They're almost complete, so this is a good time to think about what's left. We have 4 cells shaded with another set of 2 to go. So both of blue are shaded or both are not shaded. We've got these 2 cells in red where we already have 6 in the row. That are shaded, so both are shaded or both are not. Note if they're both shaded, we make a hexamino. That's no good, so they're both unshaded. That means we'll have to take at least one more coming down. Look that we just also formed another set then of 6 shaded with 2 left over. So red are the same, they're either both shaded or not, but again, they can't both be shaded. We'd make far too large a group. So we're gonna get this shape coming in, got a cell that's coming out. We already have a Z in the grid, so this is no good. We're going to get the last L is the only option really left for this. And I think one thing I'm seeing where this L is pretty forced because it can't be a U or a Z, it's the last option for it. There's going to be something that's the case over here. Let's consider the option where blue is not used. We're going to take this cell, and now we have a Z, have a U, we have an L, which is no good. So we actually have forced ourselves to not take this cell, come in and take these 2 in blue. That's sort of a kind of logic you get at, but the even row constraint at the top is giving us the L for sure, the F for sure, and this kind of a start. The 4th row may have some stuff for it. There are 3 cells to go. Notice we can't take both of these because that would isolate the spaces, so this will have a total of 1 of those 3 cells shaded. I'm not seeing, there are a lot of ways that could go still, so I'm not seeing anything we can really force right now, but let's keep in mind that that 4th row is a little bit constrained. Coming back to the bottom, we said this pentomino here is a Y or an L. The L is forced if we don't take that space, but we now have an L in the grid, so this cell is used. This cell is used. What I'm seeing are these 2 columns on the far left look pretty interesting in blue and red. This is a case where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3 are used in those rows, those columns already. So 1 but not both of what's in blue will be used. I guess I could mark that this way by saying those will be edges. In thinking through how those go, one thing we can do probably on this cell first is to say if this isn't used, it's probably most likely the cell is part of that pentomino above, but say it was this cell that was shaded. It's going to have to take some more cells to work out, and it could take as many as those 2 over to the left, but it will have to take this one, a 4th, and a 5th. It can't connect down to this Y pentomino. In doing that, we actually have now isolated something that can't become a pentomino. So the first thing I could mark for sure in this space was that top cell being in. I actually think it's trickier to think about this red, and we actually now have a new set in blue where one but not both of these are used. Again, we could mark these with the edges if you prefer like this. So I think there's going to be something about the total cell count that we've got to think about, and this first column is the big one, and I think it's because if we take this cell or not, we take this cell for sure, we're going to be left with just like 1 or 0 that come over here. And if we don't take it, we put 2 over here. And so I think that count of 2 is bad. What we have right now is 1 up that's shaded, 3 more that are shaded, and then we're going to take a 5th, which will be one of these 2. I'll mark it in this off color so we know for sure. So right now that column has 5. And from this pentomino above, we need to add 1 more in so the column takes 6. But in adding 1 more in, we've got to take 1 more in another space, and this is the only one we can take. And so I think that's known for sure. We're going to get to where we have the P effectively in the grid. We don't know where it is. It's one of 2 options. And I'll actually mark it now. We also know where the Y is in the grid, that the Y is this one on the far left corner, and the P is in the middle of the left side. So that's a good start. Still a lot to go. I think one of the things I'm seeing, we're down to 5 pentominoes, INTWX, so we're probably going to start to be in some pentomino mining spaces. Another thing that I see though is these 2 that are sort of pinned. One of the things that could happen is that the 2 cells next to them both get shaded, but recognize I already have the P pentomino in the grid, and that's the only pentomino with a 2 by 2 shape. And so I now actually have in other parts of the grid what's effectively a no 2 by 2 constraint. So I don't think it matters here right now, but I think it matters here. And it matters here because of the way we're going to be taking cells. If I took this up top and this down below, and then I have to keep extending, I'm getting to the same kind of situation I had above with the L and then with the F, is I now have an extended shape that can't be an L because I've got one, can't be a Z because I've got one, and can't be a U because I've got one. And so all collectively that says that the top of these 2 cells isn't used, the bottom one is used, and that's a great place to be starting. Notice that the deadly pattern around that was forming an L tetramino, this sort of shape. And so let's imagine we didn't take this cell and did take this cell. We again have a shape where we're growing to a U, which we can't do, a Z, which we can't do, and L pentomino, which we can't do. So this L tetramino is a bad pattern to have in the grid, and I think this is actually all forced right now based on logic. So I've got an S tetramino is going to take 1 more cell. It's not going to take this cell because we've got the F already in the grid. And this column actually looks interesting. It's got 7 cells to it. So it's going to need to take 1 more. And I'm guessing that we can, in this case, let's use 2 colors and show both of the potential options of what's going to go in. So in one version of the world, red is what's shaded. And if red is shaded, this can't be the other red cell on the lower pentomino shape because we have a Y in the grid to the far left. So it's going to form an N, and the pentomino above that can't take this blue cell, will take this red cell, that's a W. And in the space where blue is true, blue is forming an N shape up above, and then this tetramino on the bottommost row goes over 1 more. It can't form an L, so it's got to go over all the way and form an I. And so I think we've learned 2 things. I'll come over to number and just mark these. We have a state where there's an NI, and we have a state where there's an NW. Collectively, we know where the N will be, although now it's actually across 2 potential shapes, but that might be limiting. We also now know some cells that are never used, and those are cells that are seen by both of the states that are on-off. Like this is seeing a blue and a red cell, this is seeing a blue and a red cell. So we're getting some more markings, but now we've got some pretty creative colors in the grid that we're going to have to be cautious about. One thing I'm seeing is that we're going to get to where the bottom of the grid has a pretty forced set of cells taken. So let's go to the version where it's the I. 8 are in the grid, this cell will be unused, and this cell will be unused, that will put 10 in. In the version where it's an N, these cells would be unused. We now have 6 in the grid. We could try to take both of the bottom remaining, but we'd end up, let me get the right color to do this, we'd end up having to form this pattern, which will form another N and isolate things in. And so there's no way I can actually take extra cells here. And I think I know for sure the y, and then this now is even however we do it. Notice that if n comes in and takes these, we've got 4 in the row. If n isn't used but I is there, we've still got 2 in the row and 1 left over. That's got to be off so that we keep even status. It looks like the parity of the third row from the bottom changes whether we take the n or the w state, and that may influence what's going on here. Let's think a little more carefully about the shape or letter that these two can take. We might have thought we could extend all the way to this cell. If we come out here, we're going to form a V, a Y, or an N, and the V, Y, N are all used. So one thing we can say is that this cell isn't taken. I think this cell can be taken, and it would force a W or T. Actually, this pattern looks pretty much like a WT pattern. Let's look at the letters that are left, ITWX. This can't be an X, we know that. Let's quickly see if it can be an I. If it's an I, we need to have a 2x4 or 2x3 pentomino left over, and TW and X are not like that, so this isn't an I. So this pentomino over here, we'll come to this letter, is going to be a W or a T, and maybe that will help us out in thinking through some facts about it, including where it's going to take next cells. Let's come out to this one up here and think about what it takes. And it could also potentially be an I, but if it were an I, it's got to take across these cells. And again, then this row, which needs to take one more, can't take any of the ones that are available for it. So this also doesn't look like a good I. And that really means we're now constrained in where in the grid the I can be. And we have one of these states of the world in blue where the I will always be down there. But my wonder is if we are trying to be greedy and say grab these spaces to become the I, well, we run into some issues. And some of the issues that will probably come in is that we now have forced this W state of the world. We're going to force something like this state of the world. And that's going to be pretty compact. But one thing I'm seeing is I still need to put in 2 more shapes. Or actually, I would be good with just this X shape, but now I've isolated this whole space. So this factor of getting all the pentominoes into the grid is somewhat limiting. And I think this I is a key one to think through. But to try to give you this all by logic and not just sort of do this greedy packing where, around this pentomino, we're taking some of the cells around these places in all scenarios with this T, with this T, with this W, those sort of things. Those isolations really mean that right now we just have this vertical space for an I, or this one right at the bottom. But let's chip away on the right edge. Maybe that's a good way to start to limit the space, and where we still need to place one more big thing, that effectively there's still a missing pentomino in the grid, so there is something that's going to go around here. Let me use a different color. There's some pentomino that's going to be around here. That's the key constraint about fitting enough into all the spaces is that. So let's show why these cells aren't usable, and that will chip in from the right side and probably force the shape of what's in this pink zone. So to start, this rightmost column has 6 used. It's got 4 left to go, and they can't all be on. So let's agree that that's not possible because that would make another L. And if 2 are used, let's start from down here. These 2 would have to be on. That comes over to here. The N is already in the grid in blue or red, so this isn't used, and this comes over. And now we're not making any potential shapes with things that we're shading. So the first thing we know is this bottom cell here is not part of a pentomino. Now let's take the case where we take the 2 that's not through the top. And in doing that, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 in the space. So we either don't take these or take both of these, and that's going to be a problem. And you'll actually see even in the versions that take these either 2 here or 2 here, in both of those scenarios, in this case we have to take 2 more to keep this connected. That's a U shape we already have. In this case where we come out here, we can't take 2 more, that's a P, and if we take this one, we form this L shape again with 4 cells taken, which is an L, U, or Z, which are all bad. So a slow thing to do now, but a thing that I think we could prove pretty conclusively is that this rightmost space isn't taking any more cells in it. We now have a case where this next column in could potentially take 2 more cells or not. Let's say it did take those 2 cells. then it for sure is going to be a T-shape of the ones remaining. That's the only one that's possible for it, and that T-shape will be this T-shape. That means this one below in gray is going to have to be a W. The W could be of two different forms right now, coming over like this or coming over like that. It's forcing this to be the I. But we now have to say, where are we placing an X into this grid? And that's what's going to probably break things. There's only this potential X, and we've never filled anything up into this space. And so needing to fill a cell in this row, this T is no good. And again, this T was the only option if we took both of these cells in this space. So both of those cells are not used. So we'll take this one. We now still have to think of the shape this can be. It's not the I. We said that before. It could be an X. It could be a T, and it cannot, though, be a W. The W would extend down and can't be further up. So right now, this is a T or X shape. And let's just type those in just for our purposes. There are actually a few too many T-shapes it could be, and that's probably where it's going to be a little bit slow to resolve them all. One of the things, though, to note is we still want to take a cell in this fourth row, and let's think about the version where the cell isn't coming from the T, so like this T. That means we've got to take this cell up here, and that extends down. There's no more shape this can be, except, again, to come back to be an I, and that's going to be problematic because where is the X now in this grid? So if this is a T, there's going to be some stress to fit in an X as well as to fit in the cell, so this is not the T shape. This could be the T shape, but where does the X go? This looks like the only space for it, and that forces this W, which now stretches in and kills stuff. So that's no good. And there's one more T option, which is this one, but again, we have to fill in the cell and take these down. I think I actually showed this. I think there are only these two options, and I've now shown those two. So this is not a T, this is an X. Sorry, this is taking a bit of effort to show. With this being an X, we now still have to place one more pentomino in the grid, and we are still looking at these pink cells for where that goes. And that pentomino is going to be a T or a W. It can't be an I. And let's now, recognizing it can't be the I, place in the last I that we wanted to do before, because there wasn't a way to do that vertically here and still leave room for another tetromino. And that means we're now left at placing a W and a T. And one thing to consider is we're going to need to take just one of the cells in this space. So if this is a W or a T, it's going to be coming out, or like this coming out. And so that's going to be pretty quickly forcing. Note with the W options, there's no option that comes up, so all of the W's would be coming kitty corner diagonal down. This would kill immediately, and this would kill immediately. So the cell that's taken in this space for sure is the T, and that means this for sure is the W. And with that limitation, we now don't have as many options to be thinking through anymore. And we'll start by just saying this cell and this, now that we've marked this X in this column, this is the even odd row constraint being used. The W is only this W. The T has a few options, but note this row is finished. So now it's this, it only has this one option. Like so, all these columns look good by count, all these rows look good by count. We've got 4 in this row, and we have 7 there, and that finishes the full path of the solution. I think the probably best constraint that I could have used a little sooner was to just actually put in the grid what I was talking about without an I being credible vertically. The I was in that blue option down below, but if you weren't working off the I think you could chip away on this right side, and that's where I was doing a bit of roughing into the puzzle to get the shape of these things. Eventually an X and not a T. X always being a hard one to put into the grid was key. Putting a WT option there in the center. So the last steps were by far the hardest, but the intro seeds, the use of the 2-4-6-8 pattern, pretty elegant start to the puzzle. Hard end to the week, and hope you got something from this video. We'll see you again soon.